This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Mark Nelson. Love Among the Chickens by P.G. Wodehouse. Chapter 1. A Letter with a Postscript. "A gentleman called to see you when you were out last night, sir," said Mrs. Medley, my landlady, removing the last of the breakfast things. "Yes," I said, in my affable way. "A gentleman," said Mrs. Medley meditatively, "with a very powerful voice." "Caruso?" "Sir?" I said, "Did he leave a name?" "Yes, sir, Mr. Ukridge." "Oh, my sainted aunt!" "Sir?" "Nothing. "Thank you, sir," said Mrs. Medley, withdrawing from the presence. Ukridge! Oh, hang it! I had not met him for years, and, glad as I am, as a general thing, to see the friends of my youth when they drop in for a chat, I doubted whether I was quite equal to Ukridge at the moment. A stout fellow, in both the physical and moral sense of the words, he was a trifle too jumpy for a man of my cloistered and intellectual life, especially as just now I was trying to plan out a new novel, a tricky job demanding complete quiet and seclusion. It had always been my experience that when Ukridge was around, things began to happen swiftly and violently, rendering meditation impossible. Ukridge was the sort of man who asks you out to dinner, borrows the money from you to pay the bill, and winds up the evening by embroiling you in a fight with a cabman. I have gone to Covent Garden balls with Ukridge, and found myself legging it down Henrietta Street in the grey dawn, pursued by infuriated costermongers. I wondered how he got my address, and on that problem light was immediately cast by Mrs. Medley, who returned bearing an envelope. "It came by the morning post, sir, but it was left at number 20 by mistake." "Oh, thank you." "Thank you, sir," said Mrs. Medley. I recognized the handwriting. The letter, which bore a Devonshire postmark, was from an artist friend of mine, one Lickford, who was at present on a sketching tour in the West. I had seen him off at Waterloo a week before, and I remember that I had walked away from the station wishing that I could summon up the energy to pack and get off to the country somewhere. I hate London in July. The letter was a long one, but it was the postscript which interested me most. "By the way, at Yeovil I ran into an old friend of ours, Stanley Ukridge, of all people. As large as life, quite 6'2" and tremendously filled out. I thought he was abroad. The last I heard of him was that he had started for Buenos Aires in a cattle ship, with a borrowed pipe by way of luggage. It seems he has been in England for some time. I met him in the refreshment room at Yeovil station. I was waiting for a down train. He had changed on his way to town. As I opened the door, I heard a huge voice entreating the lady behind the bar to put it in a pewter, and there was S.F.U. in a villainous old suit of grey flannels. I'll swear it was the one he had on the last time I saw him, with pince-nez tacked on to his ears with ginger-beer wire as usual, and a couple of inches of bare neck showing between the bottom of his collar and the top of his coat. You remember how he could never get a stud to do its work. He also wore a mackintosh, though it was a blazing day. He greeted me with effusive shouts, wouldn't hear of my standing in the racket, insisted on being host. When we had finished, he fumbled in his pockets, looked pained and surprised, and drew me aside. "Look here, Licky, old horse," he said, "you know I never borrow money. It's against my principles. But I must have a couple of bob. Can you, my dear good fellow, oblige me with a couple of bob till next Tuesday? I'll tell you what I'll do," in a voice full of emotion, "I'll let you have this," producing a beastly little 3-penny bit with a hole in it, which he had probably picked up in the street. until I can pay you back. This is of more value to me than I can express, Licky, my boy. A very, very dear friend gave it to me when we parted, years ago. It's a wrench. Still, no, you must take it. You must take it. Licky, old man, shake hands, old horse. Shake hands, my boy." He then tottered to the bar, deeply moved, and paid up out of the 5 shillings, which he had made it as an afterthought. He asked after you, and said you were one of the noblest men on earth. I gave him your address, not being able to get out of it. But if I were you, I should fly while there is yet time." It seemed to me that the advice was good, and should be followed. I needed a change of air. London may have suited Dr. Johnson, but in the summer-time it is not for the ordinary man. What I wanted, to enable me to give the public of my best, as the reviewer of a weekly paper dealing with my last work had expressed a polite hope that I would continue to do, was a little haven in the country somewhere. I rang the bell. "Sir," said Mrs. Medley. "I'm going away for a bit," I said. "Yes, sir." "I don't know where. I'll send you the address so that you can forward letters." "Yes, sir." "And if Mr. Ukridge calls again—" At this point a thunderous knocking on the front door interrupted me. Something seemed to tell me who was at the end of that knocker. I heard Mrs. Medley's footsteps pass along the hall. There was the click of the latch. A volume of sound rushed up the stairs. "Is Garnet in? Where is he? Show me the old horse. Where is the man of wrath? Exhibit the son of Belial." There followed a violent crashing on the stairs, shaking the house. "Garnet! Where are you, laddie? Garnet! Garnet!" Stanley Fanshawe Ukridge was in my midst. End of Chapter 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Mark Nelson. Love Among the Chickens by P.G. Wodehouse. Chapter 2. Mr. and Mrs. S.F. Ukridge. I have often thought that Who's Who, though a bulky and well-meaning volume, omits too many of England's greatest men. It is not comprehensive enough. I am in it, nestling among the G's. Garnet, Jeremy, O.S. of late Henry Garnet, Vicar of Much Middlefold, Salop. Author. Publications: The Outsider, The Manoeuvres of Arthur. Hobbies: cricket, football, swimming, golf. Clubs, arts. But if you search among the U's for Ukridge, Stanley Fanshawe, details of whose tempestuous career would make really interesting reading, you find no mention of him. It seems unfair, though I imagine Ukridge bears it with fortitude. That much-enduring man has had a lifetime's training in bearing things with fortitude. He seemed in his customary jovial spirits now, as he dashed into the room, clinging on to the pince-nez which even ginger-beer wire rarely kept stable for 2 minutes together. "My dear old man," he shouted, springing at me and seizing my hand in the grip like the bite of a horse. "How are you, old buck? This is good. By Jove, this is fine, what?" He dashed to the door and looked out. "Come on, Milly. Pick up the walk-keeses. Here's old Garnet, looking just the same as ever. Devilish handsome fellow. You'll be glad you came in when you see him. Beats the zoo hollow." There appeared round the corner of Ukridge a young woman. She paused in the doorway and smiled pleasantly. "Garny, old horse," said Ukridge with some pride, "this is her. The pride of the home, companion of joys and sorrows and all the rest of it. In fact, in a burst of confidence, my wife." I bowed awkwardly. The idea of Ukridge married was something too overpowering to be readily assimilated. "Buck up, old horse," said Ukridge encouragingly. He had a painful habit of addressing all and sundry by that title. In his schoolmaster days, at one period of his vivid career, he and I had been colleagues on the staff of a private school. He had made use of it interviewing the parents of new pupils, and the latter had gone away, as a rule, with a feeling that this must either be the easy manner of genius or due to alcohol, and hoping for the best. He also used it to perfect strangers in the streets, and on one occasion had been heard to address a bishop by that title, rendering that dignitary, as Mr. Babu Jabberjee would put it, sotto voce, with gratification. "Surprised to find me married, what? Garny, old boy," sinking his voice to a whisper almost inaudible on the other side of the street, "take my tip. Go and jump off the dock yourself. You'll feel another man. Give up this bachelor business. It's a mug's game. I look on you bachelors as excrescences on the social system. I regard you, old man, purely and simply as a wart. Go and get married, laddie. Go and get married." "By gad, I've forgotten to pay the cabby. Lend me a couple of bob, Garney, old chap." He was out of the door and on his way downstairs before the echoes of his last remark had ceased to shake the window. I was left to entertain Mrs. Ukridge. So far, her share in the conversation had been confined to the pleasant smile which was apparently her chief form of expression. Nobody talked very much when Ukridge was present. She sat on the edge of the armchair, looking very small and quiet. I was conscious of feeling a benevolent pity for her. If I had been a girl, I would have preferred to marry a volcano. A little of Ukridge, as his former headmaster had once said in a moody, reflective voice, went a very long way. "You and Stanley have known each other a long time, haven't you?" said the object of my commiseration, breaking the silence. "Yes, oh yes, several years. We were masters at the same school." Mrs. Ukridge leaned forward with round, shining eyes. "Really? Oh, how nice!" she said ecstatically. Not yet, to judge from her expression and the tone of her voice, had she found any disadvantages attached to the arduous position of being Mrs. Stanley Ukridge. "He's a wonderfully versatile man," I said. "I believe he could do anything." "He'd have a jolly good try." "Have you ever kept fowls?" asked Mrs. Ukridge, with apparent irrelevance. I had not. She looked disappointed. "I was hoping you might have had some experience. Stanley, of course, can turn his hand to anything, but I think experience is rather a good thing, don't you?" "Yes, but—" "I have bought a shilling book called Fowls and All About Them, and this week's copy of C.A.C. C.A.C.? Chiefly about chickens. It's a paper, you know. But it's all rather hard to understand. You see, But here is Stanley. He will explain the whole thing." "Well, Garney, old horse," said Ukridge, re-entering the room after another energetic passage of the stairs. "Years since I saw you. Still buzzing along?" "Still, so to speak, buzzing," I assented. "I was reading your last book the other day." "Yes," I said, gratified. "How did you like it?" "Well, as a matter of fact, laddie, I didn't get beyond the 3rd page, because the scurvy knave at the bookstall said he wasn't running a free library, and in one way and another there was a certain amount of unpleasantness. Still, it seemed bright and interesting up to page 3. But let's settle down and talk business. I've got a scheme for you, Garney, old man. Yes, sir, the idea of 1,000 years. Now, listen to me for a moment. Let me get a word in edgeways." He sat down on the table and dragged up a chair as a leg rest. Then he took off his pince-nez, wiped them, readjusted the ginger-beer wire behind his ears, and, having hit a brown patch on the knee of his grey flannel trousers several times, in the apparent hope of removing it, resumed. "About fowls." The subject was beginning to interest me. It showed a curious tendency to creep into the conversation of the Ukridge family. "I want you to give me your undivided attention for a moment. I was saying to my wife as we came here, 'Garnet's the man. Clever devil, Garnet. Full of ideas. Didn't I, Milly?' 'Yes, dear.' 'Laddie,' said Ukridge impressively, 'we are going to keep fowls.'" He shifted himself farther onto the table and upset the ink-pot. "Never mind," he said. "It'll soak in. It's good for the texture. Or am I thinking of tobacco ash on the carpet? Well, never mind. Listen to me. When I said that we were going to keep fowls, I didn't mean in a small, piffling sort of way, 2 cocks and a couple of hens and a golf ball for a nest egg. We are going to do it on a large scale. We are going to run a chicken farm." "A chicken farm," echoed Mrs. Ukridge, with an affectionate and admiring glance at her husband. "Ah," I said, feeling my responsibilities as chorus, "a chicken farm." "I've thought it all over, laddie, and it's clear as mud. No expenses, large profits, quick returns. Chickens, eggs, and the money streaming in faster than you can bank it. Winter and summer underclothing, my bonny boy, lined with crackling Bradberries. It's the idea of a lifetime. Now listen to me for a moment. You get your hen—" "1 hen?" "Call it 1 for the sake of argument. It makes my calculations clearer. Very well, then. Harriet the hen. You get her. Do you follow me so far?" "Yes, you get a hen." "I told you Garnet was a dashed bright fellow," said Ukridge approvingly to his attentive wife. "Notice the way he keeps right after one's ideas, like a bloodhound. Well, where was I?" "You'd just got a hen." "Exactly. The hen, Priscilla the pullet. Well, it lays an egg every day of the week. You sell the eggs, 6 for half a crown. Keep of hen costs nothing. Profit, at least a couple of bob on every dozen eggs. What do you think of that?" "I think I'd like to overhaul the figures in case of error." "Error!" shouted Ukridge, pounding the table till it groaned. "Error! Not a bit of it. Can't you follow a simple calculation like that? Oh, I forgot to say that you get, and here is the nub of the thing, you get your first hen on tick. Anybody will be glad to let you have the hen on tick. Well, then you get this hen, this first original hen, this on-tick hen. You let it set and hatch chickens. Now, follow me closely. Suppose you have a dozen hens. Very well, then. When each of the dozen has a dozen chickens, you send the old hens back to the chappies you borrowed them from, with thanks for the kind loan, and there you are, starting business with 144 free chickens to your name. And after that, when the chickens grow up and begin to lay, all you have to do is sit back in your chair and endorse the big checks. Isn't that so, Milly?" "Yes, dear." "We've fixed it all up. Do you know Combe Regis in Dorsetshire, on the borders of Devon? Bathing, sea air, splendid scenery. Just the place for a chicken farm. A friend of Milly's, girl she knew at school, has lent us a topping old house, with large grounds. All we've got to do is get in the fowls. I've ordered the first lot. We shall find them waiting for us when we arrive." "Well," I said, "I'm sure I wish you luck. Mind you let me know how you get on." "Let you know?" roared Ukridge. "Why, my dear old horse, you're coming with us." "Am I?" I said blankly. "Certainly you are. We shall take no refusal, will we, Milly?"
"No, dear."
"Of course not. No refusal of any sort. Pack up tonight and meet us at Waterloo tomorrow."
"It's awfully good of you."
"Not a bit of it. Not a bit of it. This is pure business. I was saying to Milly as we came along that you were the very man for this. A man with your flow of ideas will be invaluable on a chicken farm. Absolutely invaluable. You see," proceeded Ukridge, "I'm one of those practical fellows, the hard-headed type. I go straight ahead, following my nose. What you want in a business of this sort is a touch of the dreamer to help out the practical mind. We look to you for suggestions, laddie, flashes of inspiration and all that sort of thing. Of course, you take your share of the profits, that's understood. Yes, yes, I must insist. Strict business between friends. Now, taking it that, at a conservative estimate, the net profits for the first fiscal year amount to £5,000. No, better be on the safe side. Say £4,500. But we'll arrange all that end of it when we get down there. Milly will look after that. She's the secretary of the concern. She's been writing letters to people asking for hens. So you see it's a thoroughly organized business. How many hen letters did you write last week, old girl?"
"10, dear."
Ukridge turned triumphantly to me. "You hear? 10! 10 letters asking for hens. That's the way to succeed. Push and enterprise."
"6 of them haven't answered, Stanley dear, and the rest refused."
"Immaterial," said Ukridge with a grand gesture. "That doesn't matter. The point is that the letters were written. It shows we are solid and practical. Well now, can you get your things ready by tomorrow, Garney, old horse?"
Strange how one reaches an epoch-making moment in one's life without recognizing it. If I had refused that invitation, I would not have, at any rate, I would have missed a remarkable experience. It is not given to everyone to see Stanley Fanshawe Ukridge manage a chicken farm. "I was thinking of going somewhere where I could get some golf," I said undecidedly.
"Combe Regis is just the place for you, then. Perfect hotbed of golf, full of the finest players. Can't throw a brick without hitting an amateur champion. Grand links at the top of the hill, not half a mile from the farm. Bring your clubs. You'll be able to play in the afternoons. Get through serious work by lunchtime."
"You know," I said, "I am absolutely inexperienced as regards fowls. I just know enough to help myself to bread sauce when I see one, but no more."
"Excellent. You're just the man. You will bring to the work a mind unclouded by theories. You will act solely by the light of your intelligence, and you've got lots of that. That novel of yours showed the most extraordinary intelligence, at least as far as the blighter at the bookstall would let me read. I wouldn't have a professional chicken farmer about the place if he paid to come. If he applied to me, I should simply send him away. Natural intelligence is what we want. Then we can rely on you?"
"Very well," I said slowly. "It's very kind of you to ask me."
"Business, laddie. Pure business. Very well, then. We shall catch the 11:20 at Waterloo. Don't miss it. Look out for me on the platform. If I see you first, I'll shout."
End of Chapter 2.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Mark Nelson. Love Among the Chickens by P.G. Wodehouse. Chapter 3. Waterloo Station, Some Fellow Travelers, and a Girl with Brown Hair. The austerity of Waterloo Station was lightened on the following morning at 10 minutes to 11, when I arrived to catch the train to Combe Regis, by several gleams of sunshine and a great deal of bustle and activity on the various platforms. A porter took my suitcase and golf clubs and arranged an assignation on number 6 platform. I bought my ticket and made my way to the bookstall, where, in the interests of trade, I inquired in a loud and penetrating voice if they had got Jeremy Garnet's Manoeuvres of Arthur. Being informed that they had not, I clicked my tongue reproachfully, advised them to order in a supply, as the demand was likely to be large, and spent a couple of shillings on a magazine and some weekly papers. Then, with 10 minutes to spare, I went off in search of Ukridge. I found him on platform 6. The 11:20 was already alongside, and presently I observed my porter cleaving a path towards me with a suitcase and golf bag. "Here you are," shouted Ukridge vigorously. "Good for you. Thought you were going to miss it." I shook hands with the smiling Mrs. Ukridge. "I've got a carriage and collared 2 corner seats. Milly goes down in another. She doesn't like the smell of smoke when she's traveling. Hope we get the carriage to ourselves. Devil of a lot of people here this morning. Still, the more people there are in the world, the more eggs we shall sell. I can see with half an eye that all these blighters are confirmed egg-eaters. Get in, sonny. I'll just see the missus into her carriage and come back to you." I entered the compartment and stood at the door, looking out in the faint hope of thwarting an invasion of fellow travellers. Then I withdrew my head suddenly and sat down. An elderly gentleman, accompanied by a pretty girl, was coming towards me. It was not this type of fellow traveller whom I'd hoped to keep out. I had noticed the girl at the booking-office. She had waited by the side of the queue while the elderly gentleman struggled gamely for the tickets, and I had had plenty of opportunity of observing her appearance. I had debated with myself whether her hair should rightly be described as brown or golden. I had finally decided on brown. Once only had I met her eyes, and then only for an instant. They might be blue. They might be grey, I could not be certain. Life is full of these problems. "This seems to be tolerably empty, my dear Phyllis," said the elderly gentleman, coming to the door of the compartment and looking in. "You're sure you don't object to a smoking carriage?" "Oh, no, father, not a bit." "Then I think," said the elderly gentleman, getting in. The inflection of his voice suggested the Irishman. It was not a brogue. There were no strange words, but the general effect was Irish. "That's good," he said, settling himself and pulling out a cigar case. The bustle of the platform had increased momentarily, until now, when, from the snorting of the engine, it seemed likely that the train might start at any minute. The crowd's excitement was extreme. Shrill cries echoed down the platform. Lost sheep, singly and in companies, rushed to and fro, peering eagerly into carriages in search of seats. Piercing voices ordered unknown Tommies and Ernies to keep by ante now. Just as Ukridge returned, that sauve-qui-peut of the railway crowd, the dreaded "Get in anywhere" began to be heard, and the next moment an avalanche of warm humanity poured into the carriage. The newcomers consisted of a middle-aged lady, addressed as Auntie, very stout and clad in grey alpaca dress, skin-tight; a youth called Albert, not, it was to appear, a sunny child; a niece of some 20 years, stolid and seemingly without interest in life, and 1 or 2 other camp-followers and retainers. Ukridge slipped into his corner, adroitly foiling Albert, who had made a dive in that direction. Albert regarded him fixedly and reproachfully for a space, then sank into the seat beside me and began to chew something that smelt of aniseed. Auntie, meanwhile, was distributing her substantial weight evenly between the feet of the Irish gentleman and those of his daughter, as she leaned out of the window to converse with a lady friend in a straw hat and hair-curlers, accompanied by 3 dirty and frivolous boys. It was, she stated, lucky that she had caught the train. I could not agree with her. The girl with the brown hair and the eyes that were neither blue or grey was bearing the infliction, I noticed, with angelic calm. She even smiled. This was when the train suddenly moved off with a jerk, and Auntie, staggering back, sat down on the bag of food which Albert had placed on the seat beside him. "Clumsy," observed Albert tersely. "Albert, you mustn't speak to Auntie so." "What'd yer want to sit on my bag for, then?" said Albert disagreeably. They argued the point. Argument in no wise interfered with Albert's power of mastication. The odor of aniseed became more and more painful. Ukridge had lighted a cigar, and I understood why Mrs. Ukridge preferred to travel in another compartment, for in his hand he bore the brand which none but he might smoke. I looked across the carriage stealthily to see how the girl was enduring this combination of evils, and noticed that she had begun to read. And as she put the book down to look out of the window, I saw with a thrill that trickled like warm water down my spine that her book was The Manoeuvres of Arthur. I gasped. That a girl should look so pretty as that, and at the same time have the rare intelligence to read me. Well, it seemed an almost superhuman combination of the excellencies. And more devoutly than ever I cursed in my heart these intrusive outsiders who had charged in at the last moment and destroyed forever my chance of making this wonderful girl's acquaintance. But for them, we might have become intimate in the first half-hour. As it was, what were we? Ships that pass in the night. She would get out at some beastly wayside station and vanish from my life without my ever having even spoken to her. Auntie, meanwhile, having retired badly worsted from her encounter with Albert, who showed a skill in logomachy that marked him out as a future Labour member, was consoling herself with meat sandwiches. The niece was demolishing sausage rolls. The atmosphere of the carriage was charged with a blend of odours, topping all Ukridge's cigar, now in full blast. The train raced on towards the sea. It was a warm day, and a torpid peace began to settle down upon the carriage. Ukridge had thrown away the stump of his cigar, and was now leaning back with his mouth open and his eyes shut. Auntie, still clutching a much-bitten section of a beef sandwich, was breathing heavily and swaying from side to side. Albert and the niece were dozing, Albert's jaws working automatically, even in sleep. "What's your book, my dear?" asked the Irishman. "The Manoeuvres of Arthur, father, by Jeremy Garnet." I would not have believed, without the evidence of my ears, that my name could possibly have sounded so musical. "Molly McEachern gave it to me when I left the Abbey. She keeps a shelf of books for her guests when they are going away. Books that she considers rubbish and doesn't want, you know." I hated Miss McEachern without further evidence. "And what do you think of it?" "I like it," said the girl decidedly. The carriage swam before my eyes. "I think it is very clever." What did it matter after that the ass in charge of the Waterloo bookstore had never heard of The Manoeuvres of Arthur, and that my publishers, whenever I slunk in to ask how it was selling, looked at me with a sort of grave paternal pity and said that it had not really begun to move? Anybody can write one of those rotten popular novels which appeal to the unthinking public, but it takes a man of intellect and refinement and taste and all that sort of thing to turn out something that will be approved of by a girl like this. "I wonder who Jeremy Garnet is," she said. "I've never heard of him before. I imagine him rather an old young man, probably with an eyeglass and conceited. And I should think he didn't know many girls. At least if he thinks Pamela is an ordinary sort of girl." "She's a creature," said Phyllis emphatically. This was a blow to me. I had always looked on Pamela as a well-drawn character, and a very attractive, kittenish little thing at that. That scene between her and the curate in the conservatory, and when she talks to Arthur at the meet of the Blankshires,
I was sorry she did not like Pamela. Somehow it lowered Pamela in my estimation.
"But I like Arthur," said the girl.
This was better. A good chap, Arthur. A very complete and thoughtful study of myself. If she liked Arthur, why, then it followed— But what was the use? I should never get a chance of speaking to her. We were divided by a great gulf of aunties and Alberts and meat sandwiches. The train was beginning to slow down. Signs of returning animation began to be noticeable among the sleepers. Auntie's eyes opened, stared vacantly round, closed, and reopened. The niece woke, and started instantly to attack a sausage roll. Albert and Ukridge slumbered on. A whistle from the engine, and the train drew up at a station. Looking out, I saw that it was Yeovil. There was a general exodus. Auntie became instantly a thing of dash and electricity, collected parcels, shook Albert, replied to his thrusts with repartee, and finally heading a stampede out of the door. The Irishman and his daughter also rose and got out. I watched them leave stoically. It would have been too much to expect that they would be going any further. "Where are we?" said Ukridge sleepily. "Yeovil? Not far now. I tell you what it is, old horse, I could do with a drink."
With that remark he closed his eyes again and returned to his slumbers. And, as he did so, my eye, roving discontentedly over the carriage, was caught by something lying in the far corner. It was the manoeuvres of Arthur. The girl had left it behind. I suppose what follows shows the vanity that obsesses young authors. It did not even present itself to me as a tenable theory that the book might have been left behind on purpose, as being of no further use to the owner. It only occurred to me that, if I did not act swiftly, the poor girl would suffer a loss beside which the loss of a purse or vanity case were trivial. 5 seconds later I was on the platform. "Excuse me," I said. "I think—" "Oh, thank you so much," said the girl. I made my way back to the carriage and lit my pipe in a glow of emotion. "They are blue," I said to my immortal soul. "A wonderful, deep, soft, heavenly blue, like the sea at noonday." End of Chapter 3